But each of these stories represents an encounter of religious and cultural difference in which some of the cumulative fears and projections that compose the history of religions in our time, in which those things have come into play. And they give expression also to the collision of global realities and global politics. And certainly one of Boston's most intense lines of conflict has been over the building of the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, that wonderful large brick, New England brick cultural center in Roxbury Crossing, right in the heart of the city, and I'm sure most of you have been there. But almost as soon as the shell of that mosque began to be created and to rise, a right-wing media outlet and a Jewish advocacy organization, the David Project, began asking questions about members of the board, their past activities, the sources of their funding, statements made by one or another of the leaders, etc., said to convey sentiments of anti-Semitism. Asking questions, of course, is fine. And the Islamic Society of Boston down on Prospect Street tried to answer them very carefully, one by one, and they posted all of this on their website. But unfortunately, the ISB website was no match for Fox News, which kept that issue in the headlines for a very long time. And those of us who know that center on Prospect Street in Cambridge could point, as we did, to a long record of their civic and interfaith engagement, hosting hundreds and hundreds of students who came, can we come to Friday prayers from the university's roundabout, and reaching out to the community, even in that weekend after 9/11, when they hosted an open house, to which they invited everyone in Cambridge. There were 400 people who came. So an extraordinary community, but one that found itself locked in a crippling legal battle. And eventually, that was settled, in part because there were some interfaith allies who tried to do some mutual healing in that context. But these were tough times and very difficult ones for Boston. And now, of course, as all of you may know, but we have the challenge again of articulating a warm welcome to the new imam that has, after all these years, been hired at the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center just this past week, Imam Suhaib Webb, American-born convert to Islam, who will take over as head of that community. All of these are moments when the interfaith relationships that all of you have built need to come into play. And there are so many of these that have happened in Boston. The Daughters of Abraham Book Club, you know something about that, that has basically sparked similar book clubs all over the country, all over New England at least. The Greater Boston Interfaith Organization that works very specifically on issues of housing and health, and had a great deal to do with the lobbying for that universal health care bill that was passed here. Other kinds of interfaith allies, like the Boston chapter of the Interfaith Committee for Worker Justice, that really is concerned with justice for our workers. Or Massachusetts Power and Light, that is also an interfaith group concerned primarily with its focus on the environment. But in all of these, I mentioned simply the importance of the local. Because even though they may have national chapters and whatnot, the work needs to be done here. Where do our lives and our cultures overlap and join? Is it in education in our community? Is it in the PTA, in the schools? Is it over a worker justice issue? Because the most important of these interfaith encounters are not the places where Dalai Lamas and popes and swamis meet, but where we meet one another. And we will work out that future here, changing our world literally one relationship at a time. This can be slow work, but it also is work that very much needs to be done. And we can point over the last years to many, many examples of where cities have taken up these great projects. The Louisville Festival of Faith, for example, in which they have a whole week in Louisville, Kentucky, of all the things that happen, and people come from around the city and really now from around the country to participate in a week-long interfaith celebration. And during that week, they also get a passport that gives them, all of them, encouragement over the next period of a year to visit the different religious sites of their neighbors. And that Louisville Festival has also been duplicated in half a dozen other cities in the United States. Or I think of Houston, Texas, where it was really the mayor and one of the interfaith groups that put together the Amazing Faiths dinner dialogues that will happen again this next couple of weeks on November 17th. The idea was, let's have people of faith, of different faiths, meet over dinners in people's homes. Let's say 8 or 10 people per dinner party, and sign up, and we will take charge of arranging who's coming to your dinner party. You can sign up on the internet. And when you get there, simple vegetarian meal, and there were 20 of them that were hosted that first year. There is a facilitator, and there is a deck of cards. And the deck of cards has questions on it. And you're supposed to turn over one and think about it and respond. And the questions are things like this. Faith sometimes changes as we grow older. How has your faith changed through the years? Where do you see acts of compassion in the world around you? What do you pray for? And how do you understand it if your prayer is not answered? What's the role of faith in your life at work? Today, as in the past, people of faith are persecuted for what they believe. What would you do if your faith were forbidden? Now, these kinds of questions are not questions you're supposed to answer as, I'm the representative of the Christians, the United Methodist Church branch. You're supposed to actually just answer them as a person and begin to listen to one another as we express a response to some of the deepest questions. Well, the interesting thing about that is that the first year in Houston, there were like 20 of these dinner parties. By the next year, there were 73 with more than 800 people who came. By now, I have no idea. I'm sure there will be 1,000 or more in a couple of weeks' time. And they, too, are duplicated in places like Oklahoma City, Chicago, Raleigh, Durham, Harrisburg. You can go on the web and find them. Amazing Faiths dinner parties, or dinners. I'm not sure about the parties part. But these are just some of the kinds of things that are happening. And I would say, as I begin to close here, because I know I must, that the issues that come up in your own town are not likely to be of your own choosing. They're just the things that happen, and whatever happens may be the first thing that you have to wrestle with. A Danish newspaper publishes cartoons that Muslims consider denigrating of the Prophet, and suddenly that becomes an issue in your town, in suburban Boston. How did that happen? Or in Cambridge, the superintendent of schools is trying to think about whether Eid should be a school holiday for everybody. Or in Kentucky, if you were a Kentucky citizen right now, you might find that the issue for you in Kentucky was that the governor has just been attacked for attending a Bhumi Puja that is attended upon the groundbreaking of a facility that's sponsored by the Hindus, and accused of having a red dot on his forehead, and therefore somehow participating in this foreign religion, inappropriate for a governor. Anyway, these are the things that happen. These are the issues that you might have to address as you get together and build on those relationships with one another. But I think that it's good for us to remember this thing that Mumford said, that we need to lay a new foundation for urban life in a world that requires a new kind of city to survive in and amidst all of this diversity. The logo of the International Metropolis Conference is a huge suspension bridge. And of course we know that bridges are the lifelines of a society on the move, and our health, the health of our cities is really dependent on the strength of the bridges that we've put in place. Some of them, the real bridges of our urban stimulus plan, those are important too, the new bridges that are being built and repaired. But we also need to think about those other bridges that we create as citizens in the cities and towns that we live in. And the creation of interreligious initiatives, of networks, is what the theorist Robert Putnam refers to as bridging capital. This is the kind of capital you all are creating, the social capital that brings people together across our differences. And in the kind of world in which we live today, this also is an important and urgent urban stimulus necessity, to create that bridging capital that will enable the kinds of relationships that will sustain our cities and towns, and indeed our whole world in the future. Thank you very much. I'm going to entertain questions and comments.